So, coming from the register, Mythos discovers SquidBleed, a memory leak that's gone undetected since the Clinton era. So I think this is kind of an interesting story. It strikes me personally. If you followed me for any length of time, especially back when I used to do like technical videos, I love me some Squid. Squid proxy server, especially as a Squid caching proxy server, is about one of the most amazing things you can ever install into your infrastructure. It just makes your life so much better. So anyways, I really love me a SQUID proxy server. But the other thing that I think is really interesting about this particular story is it shows the vulnerability in open source software. There's this idea with all the 18-year-old kids out there, right? I talk about using proprietary software. So Windows computers, Mac OS, all of this different type of stuff. And you get the 18-year-old. The 18-year-olds that know everything, right? They're 18. They know, right? They may have been alive, for less time than I've literally been a technology professional, but they know so much more than I do, right? And so one of the things I want to talk about proprietary software a lot is I get this pushback from the kids out there saying, open source is superior. And look, many times open source is superior, right? Linux operating system, if you need to spin up a server, if you need to spin up hundreds or thousands of servers, you're probably gonna wanna do that with Linux, right? That's open source software, right? Squid proxy server, I actually don't know a proprietary proxy server that would probably be better than Squid, right? Squid is a great thing. There's a lot of really good open source projects out there, but the fact of the matter is, open source isn't the end all be all. There are real reasons why you would use proprietary software in order to, actually do work, right? When you have to pay the bills, you focus a little bit more on the products that you're going to be using. But one of the big things that comes up with the kids out there is this whole idea that open source is more secure. Don't you know, you not a boomer? Open source is more secure. And one of the points that I put out there is, well, the issue with open source, right? So you got proprietary software, and the problem with proprietary software is you have no idea how that software is written. Many times you have really no idea what that software is actually doing, and to be clear, that is a real issue. And so the idea with open source software is you can see the source code. So obviously, if everybody can see the source code, it is always going to be more secure than proprietary software. And the point that I always try to make to the kids out there is like, yeah, just because you can read something doesn't mean you do. Right? Just because you can read the documentation doesn't mean you're going to read the documentation. Right? What geek reads documentation before they start spinning shit up? None of them do. You have the ability to read the documentation, but you don't do it, right? You hyperscale the geek community, right? And now you have millions of people that can read the source code, but they don't. Apt install, blah. I could read the source code, but I'm sure I am sure somebody else read the source code. And that's where you get some of these failures with open source projects where there are vulnerabilities, and especially if the vulnerability hits a problem that's kind of like edge case or whatever, people aren't necessarily looking for, it can coast for years, right? We saw this with a DNS, with something called bind. I do believe that there was a failure on one of the DNS servers, something called bind. It was like a decade. Like this, it had been there for like 10 years, and all of a sudden, the problem came to light, and you had all these ISPs and all these people running infrastructure that had to update their DNS servers overnight. And that's not a normal thing. You're not really thinking about patch management on your DNS servers as being like a priority. It was that week. It definitely was that week, right? But it was a decade. It was a decade of this, whatever, there's a bind vulnerability in DNS, and nobody had realized it was there. And so what's interesting here with Mythos going through and looking through Squid proxy server is they found a vulnerability that has been there for 30 years. 30 years this vulnerability is there. One of the interesting parts about the vulnerability too is the vulnerability was added in order to deal with something called netware. Do you remember NetWare? No, shut up, stop, you don't. Most of you don't remember NetWare. There's something called NetWare a long time ago. Novell. Anyways, there's this issue with SQUID proxy servers connecting into to NetWare systems. Whatever, there's a problem going on there. And so they implemented this fix. So it fixed how the communication between NetWare and SQUID would work. Here's the thing. NetWare died a brutal, horrible, nasty death. Don't Google search what happened to NetWare if it's late at night and you need a good night's sleep. What happened to NetWare was just, it was bad. It was just bad. It was just a massacre of software. What they did to NetWare was just not pretty as far as a geek is concerned. But here's the thing. NetWare died a long time ago. I can't remember the last time NetWare was relevant. Maybe 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago was 2006. Were you running NetWare in 2006? It's been a long time. And so the interesting thing, so this vulnerability was added to SQUID in order to fix a problem with a piece of software that hasn't been in environments for decades. But the vulnerability has persisted. And this is the kind of stuff that you have to be concerned about realistically in the real world of cybersecurity, and especially with like Mythos and all of these Mythos class models coming out. One of the things you really have to be thinking about is how you can secure your environment. So we talk about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity should be an onion. You should have numerous layers to your cybersecurity environment so that if any one or any 5 layers are breached, and that's the thing, like a lot of times you think about an onion and you're like, oh, well, if one layer is breached, my system should remain secure. No, motherfuckers, like half your layers should be able to be breached and your system should be able to be secure, because there might be this problem with a SQUID proxy server and there might be this problem over here with user privileges that are escalated beyond the level that they should be on, and a spear phishing attack on a system administrator, right? You start adding all these things up and you need to be able to handle all of that. So anyways, this is going to be a very good example of why be careful with open source. This is not, I am not knocking open source. I would still use SQUID proxy server. Awesome piece of software, but I would use common sense. Distrust, verify, stay suspicious. That is how you stay. I'm not sure it's safe, but it is how you stay sane in the technology world. Sometimes it takes a while to detect a vulnerability. A 29-year-old Heartbleed style vulnerability in SQUID, a popular open source caching proxy server, silently leaked users' plaintext HTTP requests and potentially revealed sensitive data, including credentials and session tokens, for decades until AI and a few humans saved the day. A security researcher and Mythos preview found the flaw and reported it to project maintainers, who fixed the code earlier this month. SQUID is widely used by large corporations, schools, and internet service providers to cache, filter, and monitor network traffic. And Caliph.io researcher Lam Jun Rong said he came across the open source proxy while attempting to connect to the internet on a flight. Quote, as you might expect, the version of SQUID deployed on the plane was released nearly 10 years ago and is affected by the vulnerability I'm about to share with you. This is the other thing to be thinking about, especially in this Mythos world, right? So much of the stuff like people are worried about, like with Mythos, like, oh my God, Mythos is gonna cut through state-of-the-art security systems. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe. But here's the thing: in the real world, Windows XP is still deployed. I had somebody comment in one of the videos that I did, and apparently they're in an environment that is just chock-a-block full of Windows XP. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved Windows XP. Windows XP Past Service Pack 2 was a fabulous operating system. But lordy, it is 2026. What the hell are you people doing? And this is going to be one of the big issues with Mythos and all this stuff coming out, is the fact of the matter is so many systems are so far behind the times, right? When there's zero-day attacks coming out, one of the big things you have to do is you have to think there's something called patch management. So actually updating all the patches for all of your systems and servers and all that kind of thing. And one of the things you have to think about is when a zero-day vulnerability comes out is how quickly will you be able to push those patches into your production environment? Because remember, anytime you modify the production environment, you might make the production environment go So the thing to protect the production environment might also kill the production environment. That's its own funness. So how you roll out patches can be very important. And so that's what a lot of smart, really highly paid system administrators try to figure out. How can we roll out the latest patches in such a way to protect our systems from new vulnerabilities at the exact same time we also don't crash the systems by installing the patches, because there can be problems there. But here's the thing, that's the thing, like we're thinking about Mythos, we're thinking about like cutting edge technology. And here's the real world, boys and girls. So many of the services that we're using, they haven't been updated in a decade. And again, this is why I start screaming about cybersecurity policy in the United States, because it is so behind the times, right? They are so focused on freaking artificial intelligence, Mythos. Right now, they're focused on quantum fucking encryption. And I'm like, dude, your SQUID proxy server hasn't been updated in a decade. And you're talking about quantum encryption issues. How about we update our SQUID proxy servers, and then we can talk about quantum encryption. And that's what I love about the kids too, because the kids come out, they start screaming, yeah, all encryption is gonna be destroyed in 5 years because of quantum computers, Eli. That's the problem with not boomers, right? You're not with the times. And like, here's the thing, neither is your infrastructure. Neither is your infrastructure. But anyways, you can't teach the kids this, right? You can't. No number of lectures can get this concept into the kids' heads. They have to go into the environments and realize what legacy really means. It's like, I heard of Eli the computer guy talking about legacy. I never grasped what it meant until I walked into my first server room. So anyways, yeah, decade old SQUID proxy servers on airplanes. And is affected by the vulnerability I'm about to share with you. Wrong wrote in a blog post about the bug, which he dubbed SquidBleed, and investigated with the help of Anthropic's Claude Mythos preview. According to Wrong, SquidBleed leaks internal memory from every session of SQUID in its default configuration with two conditions. First, SQUID has to be able to read and inspect network traffic, so it must be handling clear text, so HTTP and not HTTPS, so basically not going through SSL, or to be deployed in TLS terminating setups. Additionally, the proxy must be allowed to reach an attacker-controlled FTP file transfer protocol server via TCP port 21. And so I think this is probably one of the reasons this may not have come up. One, all the traffic has to be done in HTTP, though 30 years ago, I mean even 10 years ago, most traffic was still in HTTP. And also, you have to have this whole FTP thing going on. The bug exists in SQUID's FTP directory listing parser, and it was injected into the open source code as commit blah blah, created in 1997 to support old NetWare servers. Quote, strchr, string character, I guess, treats that terminating null as part of a string it searches, so it returns a pointer instead of null, and the loop never stops, Wrong explains. Quote, it walks off the end of the buffer, and whatever, this thing copies whatever follows back to the attacker as a file name. So basically what happens is you get into this issue where a loop isn't terminating, and so it realizes it's not terminating, and so essentially everything in the buffer is taken as text and is written to the FTP server as a file name. This results in a heap overread that can leak HTTP requests that often contain passwords or API keys, and Wrong demonstrated this exploit in a proof of concept. So yeah, it apparently works too. I do have to say, this would have to be a very particular situation. So you have to be going through HTTP. They have to have an FTP server set up. You probably have to be going somewhere that would then direct you to that FTP server for some reason. Or FTP. That's one of the things that gets left out of this. So it would be a very, very particular situation. I'm not sure I would update my SQUID proxy server like midnight tonight. Probably noon tomorrow I would do it. So this probably isn't actually going to be affecting a lot of people. I just kind of think this is interesting. Basically with the idea of a 29-year-old vulnerability. Boy, that vulnerability has been around longer than you've been alive. All right? And this is the issue that we're dealing with open source. And I think this is going to be a big problem with Mythos and all these models coming out. Basically, that level of model coming out is they have all the documentation. They have all the information, right? They're doing their computations or whatever else. And I think basically they're just simply going to be able to suss out these vulnerabilities that have simply been there forever and nobody thinks about them anymore. And so that's going to cause a big problem. That's why we need real cybersecurity policy in the United States. Our politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, need to stop screaming about, Bible verses in high schools or genders in high schools or whatever else and focus on modern infrastructure. This is what I scream about when I keep talking about focus on hospitals, right? Whether you're red hat, whether you're blue hair and wear a red hat, if you have a heart attack, you should not have to worry about going bankrupt. You should focus on getting healthy. Right? That is what our society should be focused on, right? When we look at cybersecurity in the United States, this is what I scream about. TikTok fundamentally isn't the biggest problem. I know I do a lot of videos on China, so everybody thinks I'm a Sinophile or whatever garbage. I'm not. Look, I'm not saying that TikTok isn't an issue. I'm saying if I look at the cybersecurity issues of our country as a nation state, right? And you gave me TikTok, right? It would be the 99th fucking problem on the list. We have so many other fundamental problems with cybersecurity in this country, but all our politicians know how to do is scream about China, right? You sit there, you start trying to talk about open source projects and DNS and how communication protocols work and how you need to do layered security and how things need to be audited and the whole 9 yards. And their eyes just glaze up. But Eli, where does China man get involved? It's like, China's not part of this. China's not part of this. All right. So anyways, what do you think about this? What do you think about open source projects that might have a couple of vulnerabilities? What do you think about the U.S. cybersecurity policy? I don't know. What do you think about 2026? Hell of a year. Anyways, put your thoughts down in the comment section. If you like these episodes, do remember they're on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Link is down below. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, there's a link down there too. With that, see y'all later.